Hello, good afternoon, and thank you everybody for spending a few minutes to listen to me. So I've gone for a very dramatic title, Connecting the World and Saving the Sky, which isn't complete hyperbole. It is true, and clearly I'm a very small part of that overall system, but it is the aim of what we're trying to do. My name's Ian Muirhead, and I'm a researcher in the Space Systems Research Group, so I'm interested in spacecraft and satellites and systems engineering. And just on the bottom of there is my LinkedIn, and I think the slides are being shared again at the end, so please feel free to connect that way if you've got any questions after this. First thing I'm going to do is very briefly give you a 2-minute explainer on how orbits work. So satellites orbiting around the Earth, they orbit in circles, and they orbit in specific regions for different purposes. And the first one I want to briefly talk about is geostationary equatorial orbit. It's the one that's quite far away. It's just under 40,000 kilometers away from the Earth. And this is in line with the equator. And the really good part about that area is that satellites orbiting the Earth there orbit at exactly the same rotational time for a full orbit as the Earth spins, so they stay in the same position in the sky. And you'll notice this because your Sky television, if you ever use it, the dish never moves. It points to a single satellite there. And they're really common orbits, but they're quite far away, and it's quite a radiation dangerous environment, so quite expensive to get satellites there. But it's the primary place for where communication satellites have worked and has been really important. But even though light's very fast, it is still very far away. So there's challenges in how long it takes the signal to get backwards and forwards. A next orbit that's often used is medium Earth orbit. So this is kind of like in a Goldilocks zone, a sweet spot between the Van Allen radiation belts, where it's you're able to operate satellites, but it's still not a great environment. It's still far away. And because it's actually closer to the Earth, the rotation of the orbit is faster than the Earth's going, so the satellites will move across the sky. In fact, this is where your GPS works. When you connect to GPS, you're actually connected to 4 satellites in this region, and their movement is what you use to identify your position, your location. And then the third one I want to talk about then is low Earth orbit, and these are satellites that are much closer than the Earth, much closer to the Earth, just outside the edge of the atmosphere, but inside the radiation belt. So they're a pretty benign environment, so you don't have to have super hardened equipment. It's quite close, so you don't need a great deal of energy to get there, so it's probably easier to get there. And if you add up all the satellites across these orbits that are currently operational, it's about 7,500. And 10 years ago, the split was effectively a small proportion in GEO, which are your GPS satellites, and then about 50-50, it's with MEO, sorry, and then about 50-50 between the ones that are very far away and providing communications over a fixed position, because you can see most of the Earth from very far away, or ones that are very close in the low Earth orbit, and that means you need lots of satellites to cover the Earth. But in the last 10 years, that's changed quite a lot, with it going to over 90% in low Earth orbit. And the reason that's changed, if I just press, everyone loves a rocket launch, so that's a Falcon 9 SpaceX rocket that's going off. And the reason things have changed in part is because of this rocket, that effectively, rather than building a whole new rocket, throwing everything away and just leaving the satellites in space, they're able to reuse parts of the rocket. They land, it looks like something from science fiction, and that's brought the cost down. And the second thing that's happened, if we press go again, there should be another video. This is around 50 satellites deploying in space from a launch like the one you've seen on the left. And because you've been able to have cheap launch costs and mass production of satellites, suddenly we've been able to have an exponential increase in the types of satellites that we're using. And the primary driver for this is SpaceX and a Starlink network owned by Elon Musk. And effectively, out of the 7,500-ish satellites that are operating, about 5,000 from this one single network. And this is a low Earth orbit, about 500-600 kilometers above us, just to provide internet. And it's completely changed the way we use in space. So that's the way things are going. More satellites, and satellites going lower, particularly for telecommunications. The bit that my research group are very much bothered about is investigating very low Earth orbit. So this is even below where the Starlink and the low Earth orbit is, and this is inside the upper edge of the atmosphere. Now, please don't think that it's like the atmosphere that we're in right now. It's still very rarefied. It's still very spread out and dispersed. But below 500 kilometers, it starts to affect the spacecraft, and there's drag on it, and it starts to bring it back down to Earth. So a lot of the research in my research group is about working inside the edge of the atmosphere and how we can do it. And they do that things through aerodynamic design. So on the right hand side, there are 3 spacecraft that have operated in low Earth orbit, and you can see they all look quite streamlined, which you don't actually normally have to do for a spacecraft, and that's to reduce the resistance and the drag. And 2 of them, at least the top 2 satellites, have a kind of low thrust propulsion, and that's to counteract the drag and maintain them in orbit for a long time. Otherwise, they deorbit quite quickly. And the real benefits of using this low altitude are you can use cheap and commercial designs, and it doesn't cost that much to get there. It's cheaper the lower you have to go. So you can start putting more satellites up and smaller satellites to do the same job. And the main uses are Earth observation, because you get closer to the Earth, you can see better. And that's what a lot of people have researched up to now in this orbit. But what I'm particularly looking at is telecommunications uses, which hasn't been done. And the thing I'm particularly interested in, non-terrestrial networks. So this is using space to connect your mobile phones, to connect normal terrestrial communications networks like your mobile phone, using space to fill up coverage gaps. So 5G across the world, about 35% of the world's population are currently covered by 5G, and that's very much focused in the developed world. So if you think of things like sub-Saharan Africa and Latin America, that goes down to 5 to 7%. And the mobile companies are expanding, and they say it's going to be 85% of the world by 2030, but that still leaves 1 billion people in the world without assured high-speed internet connectivity. And actually, it's very focused on urban areas. It's focused on cities, and we'll have all known, you go outside an urban area, you go into the countryside and you start losing signals. And that's particularly important for the developing and global south, where people are often spread into rural areas. So this is what I want to look at. So the thing I'm particularly concerned about is doing direct to device. So using your mobile phone directly to a satellite to effectively connect for your mobile network. And there's a few problems with that, is that if you're using a small device, you haven't got a lot of power to transmit. I haven't got a big satellite dish. I've only got a little handset, and it's got a little antenna in it. And actually, I don't want you to use your whole battery in 20 minutes connecting to a satellite, because there's only so much capacity. So coming closer actually helps this, because we don't make it such a burden on the handset. And also, if we're going to integrate with terrestrial networks, we need to use the same configurations that networks use, rather than expecting the world to change for us. So the specific frequencies which are helped by going lower, and specific ways of accessing which are helped by coming lower. So effectively, this is what I'm looking at. And a really important part is that it can contribute to network resilience and critical national infrastructure, because if you're not reliant on local power or local issues, you can maintain connectivity even in things like a natural disaster or a power cut or a flood or something that takes down your normal mobile network. You can fall back to the satellite even in urban areas. And so I'm coming to the end of my time. So things I've looked at is possible applications. There's like remote medicine, because effectively it will be very, very quick, and you can connect anywhere in the world to do remote medicine. Self-driving vehicles that need to be able to connect all the time, no matter where they're transiting, would be useful. And things like environment and climate monitoring. So you can have sensors all over the world that are very small, very low powered, and are giving you constant updates on the status of ocean temperature and things like that. So that's a connection to other people in the network that I'd like to maybe hear about if somebody's got any things that interest, where ubiquitous low speed connectivity would be useful. And then just to whip through a few of the challenges, all these big constellations actually are visible in the sky, and it's great that you can see satellites. It's quite exciting, but as we're getting more and more, it's becoming more and more damaging and impactful. And in fact, this video here is a camera in the sky in Canada, and you can see satellite streaks coming across. And if we just click on, that's the cumulative effect over a night, which is really bad for astronomy and actually destroying the natural night sky. And in fact, although there's 7,500 satellites currently operational, there's registration applications for up to 1 million to be launched. Now, I don't think that many will happen, but it could go 10-fold, 20-fold in the next decade, which will have a serious, significant impact. And this even affects beyond the Earth. So these are images from Hubble Space Telescope that have satellites above the telescope transiting through it. So part of what I'm concerned is if you can go lower, maybe you can reduce that impact, and in fact use smaller antennas. So this is an antenna designed exactly for mobile from space, and it's huge. It was the second brightest thing in the sky in a prototype. So if I can get lower, I can make them smaller and have less of an impact on the night sky. And then the very final point, very final slide then, is to protect the space environment and space junk. It's building up, and you can see in the table yourself that as you get lower, it effectively reduces the time. Just by turning off your thrust and turning off your power for your spacecraft, it starts to degrade. And if you turn the drag profile, so you've got the largest surfaced area in the direction of motion, it happens quicker. So they're always going to clean up. You're never going to have space junk. So going lower also gives environmental benefits. Thank you for listening. Please connect to me, and I'd love to hear of some ideas about how having this kind of capability would help you, or even challenges, things like legislative challenges, or depending on which department you're with, it might connect to your work. Thank you for your time.